Hey everyone, I'm Rather Incoherent. Festival of Legends is just about to go live, the core set is just about to rotate, we're going to lose all the old expansions, we're going to get some new cards and lose some cards from our core set, some things are getting buffed, and it's time to talk about Shaman right before all that happens. Now with most classes in Festival of Legends, they have 1 to 2 clear archetypes, and a couple of hanger-ons. With Shaman, it feels like they have like 1 archetype, and then a bunch of random stuff that doesn't really have any theme to it. Because there's the clear Overload package, you have like Jazz-based, Flowrider, Jive, and Enza, and Altered Chord, and Pack the House has Overload on it, so it goes in there. But then the other cards are Brass Elemental, Chill Vibes, Saxophone Soloist, and Melomania, and there's like no common theme whatsoever between these cards, and I don't know what they're for. So I guess I'll go with the ones that don't really make sense to me first. We've got Melomania, 0 mana Shaman spell. Each time you play a minion this turn, add a random Shaman spell to your hand. No thank you. That's pretty much my full opinion on this card. I don't know why you'd put this in your deck. You're giving up a card slot to theoretically, like, if you do well with this card, if you are in the right spot for it to go off, you get 3 random Shaman cards. Is that even going to help you? And by definition, if you're putting this in your deck, you must be some sort of aggro deck, right? Because a control deck's not going to be spamming out a bunch of minions. It's not summoning, it's playing. This card just doesn't make sense and will never have a home. Now, I get what Saxophone Soloist is supposed to do, besides having sick art. I love that art. 1 mana, 1/2 Murloc, Battlecry if you control no other minions, add a Saxophone Soloist to your hand. Now, Murlocs won't have minions, so this seems like anti-synergy at first, but this is essentially just insurance to area of effect. You play Saxophone Soloist first, you keep the one it generates, you throw down a bunch of other stuff. Your board gets cleared, Saxophone Soloist, you keep the free one, throw down a bunch of other stuff. Essentially, every time you rebuild, you'll always have 1 more Saxophone Soloist than you would have had if you had been running another card, at least after that first clear. That's neat. As a concept, I like it, but it's a 1 mana 1/2. If I'm gonna have more Murlocs, I'd like them to be more Murlocs that like actually do something. This one only does anything with other Murlocs buffing it, and generally speaking, I don't think my 4th board of Murlocs is gonna have a lot of buffs left to fuel it. I think this is just gonna be like a 1/2 with 2 other dudes sitting pitifully on my board, wishing I had played another deck. I don't think that this is the sauce that Murloc Shaman needed to get going. We've got Chill Vibes, which is an undeniably good card if Control Shaman were to exist. It's a 3 mana Frost spell, restore 8 health, finale, summon a 3/3 Elemental with Taunt. Baby, that is Elemental Synergy, Antique Healbot for 2 mana less. That is a good card. It's just, who's Control Shaman? Who's that? I've never heard of them. That's not a thing in Standard. What are you talking about? And then we have the Brass Elemental, which is a good meme. I like the Tuba armor as much as anyone else. But it's also just sort of weird. This might briefly look like Zilliax if you forgot about Magnetic and Lifesteal, you know, the 2 most important things on that card. I don't know, man. It's fine. Like, you play it, it's gonna hit twice for 3, it's gonna have immediate board impact, it has Taunt, Divine Shield, so it's a good defensive card too. It's never gonna be a terrible card. You can put this in pretty much any deck that's not a pure face deck and it'll be okay. But I don't see a reason to play it at all in any deck over the alternatives. And with the random hanger-ons out of the way, we can start talking about the real meat and potatoes of this set. It's the Overload package. The Totem package is also getting a lot of support, but that's from core set rotation. We'll cover that in a little while. For now, let's focus on the Overload and the driving reason behind why you would want to do this. The Jazz base is a 3 mana 2/2 weapon with Death Rattle. Your next spell costs 1 less. Overload while equipped to improve. Now, at this point, we actually have to go look at the core set, because some cards in the core set are very, very important for evaluating this archetype. And in fact, some cards in the core set were buffed. And without looking at the core set at least a little bit, we cannot possibly cover this appropriately. In the core set, we're losing the Frog, we're losing Mana Tide, Maelstrom Portal, Tide Surge, and Rockbatter Weapon. I'm kind of sad to see Rockbatter Weapon go, but it's been nerfed to 2 mana for a long time now, so not really sad to see it go, it's been nerfed into unplayability. And then in exchange, we're getting some really hot new cards. Shaman might be the biggest winner of the core set rotation. We're getting Grand Totem Eyesore and Thing from Below for Totem Shaman. Those are some of the hugest, most important synergy cards in that set. And then the rest of this is all for Overload Shaman. They get Overdraft, it's becoming evergreen, it's not rotating out, or Tradable is, and this is going into the core set. They're getting Ancestral Knowledge back, buffed to Overload 1, and they're getting Zap. So yeah, there's a lot of overload synergy that's very important. This being in the core set matters a lot for how we're going to view that archetype. So Jazz Bass is going to be good. This is going to be one of the stars of the deck. The question is just, what are the biggest payoff spells that we can run? Because we can overload ourselves, and the overload won't be the biggest deal thanks to Overdraft. We have the synergies. Just what is the payoff? What's the Jazz Bass actually buying us? Well, one of the things it can buy us is Jive Insect. It's a 5-mana fire spell that transforms a minion into Ragnaros the Fire Lord. Overload 2, which is not going to be a huge problem with this deck, I imagine. I'm really interested in seeing just how good this is, and Jazz Bass is starting to look like it fits into a deck. The other legendary for Shaman is Enza, 5-mana 5/5, which is fine. Battlecry for the rest of the game, your overload cards cost 1 less. That's obviously a very good effect, mana cheat's always good. The main question is just, is that enough to push the deck up meaningfully? You won't always draw him with a deck function without him. It seems like he's just good enough to make the cut, and he's gonna obviously help you a lot when you draw him on curve, and without him the deck will be a little bit worse, but it'll be fine. Enza's definitely not the reason to play this though. He's just a good card if it has justification to be played. I think the main payoff for Overload Shaman though is the idea of accelerating out Pack the House. This is a 7-mana card that summons a random 6/5, 4, and 3 cost minion, Overload 2. In terms of raw math, this is 9 mana for 18 cost of random minions, so 2-to-1. But I think realistically for tempo, you're probably getting like 14, 15 cost of actual stats for 7 mana up front, which is actually about the same 2-to-1 rate, really. I think this is a really strong card, and if you're able to cheat it out early with something like a Jazz Bass, or even just play like on curve Enza into Pack the House on 6, right? That's really scary. I think that's one of the main appeals of playing this deck. And since this card works this way, it might encourage you to run some Muck Pool synergy, where if you're going to summon a bunch of random minions, having a Muck Pool on board lets you reroll a low roll, and that can be very helpful. I'm not sure if Muck Pool will make the cut in an overload deck. There's a lot of stuff that needs to be there and not enough minions to really synergize properly with it, but it is worth a thought. Altered Chord is also part of the overload package. 5 mana, lifesteal, deal 5 damage to a minion. That's pretty rough, but cost 3 less if you're overloaded. So is 2 mana, deal 5, lifesteal good enough? I mean, obviously yes. If this is a deck Altered Chord wants to be a part of it, but then you have to realize, like, what's your win condition? How does Overload Shaman win? The answer is they flood the board, they beat their opponent to death. Lifesteal to heal and deal with minions, that's a control thing. That's not really what Overload Shaman seems to be leaning towards as its win condition. So even though the card actually seems really efficient, I don't think it fits into the Overload decks as I'm imagining them. And lastly, we have a very good 2-drop for Shaman. 2 mana, 3/2 Naga, Battlecry. If you're overloaded, discover a spell from your deck. That's a really good effect. Because if the payoff for this class is big spells that involve overload synergies, having a 2 mana that just tutors them out is kind of wild. This is a very, very good card, and in conjunction with its payoffs for the archetype, is helping a lot to try to push Shaman back into viability. Now, I've already covered all the stuff in the core set, and all the buffs were in those core set rotations, which brings us to the part where we look at the list of Shaman decks on Vicious Syndicate. There aren't any. Shaman is not currently viable. That was quick. So, Shaman can't get worse. Since the Gold Ball Null nerf, there have been no Shaman decks at all in Standard that were competitively viable. So, I think both Totem and Overload Shaman stand a chance, especially Totem Shaman. Coming over to Totem Shaman, the deck was already close to viability. With Grand Totem Eyesore and Thing from Below, it gets a lot closer. We're also adding buffed Ancestral Knowledge for more draw. Is it going to be a top tier deck? I doubt it. Is Bloodlust going to make the cut? I hope so. But there's definitely a tempo totem deck that exists for Shaman now. They've gotten enough in the class, in the current rotation, that Totem Shaman is not just a meme. I don't queue into Shaman, laugh, and wonder what child I'm going to be stealing candy from today, because this is actually a real deck. This is, at the very least, in that realm of like fringe tier 4 decks that current mech decks inhabit, right? Mech Mage and March of the Lich King is not a good deck, but it is a functional deck that can win games. There's just a million reasons to play other things. Shaman is at least in that ballpark now. And it looks to me like they're a lot better than that. It looks like they're going to have a competitive deck that exists. In addition, we have Overload Shaman, a very different looking deck where our game plan is much more about burning the opponent out after we steal the board. You can build this deck very differently. I've gone the route of Doomhammer and Fire Elemental, and trying to push my opponent out of the game with stuff like that. You can completely 180 and try to control the game, in which case I would ask what I have often asked with control decks in this rotation: what is your late game win condition? Because I don't see them. With almost all the control decks, when I look at their late game cards, when I go down to the end of the list in standard cards, I'm like, what are you here for? Why am I playing a control deck? What's in the late game? And I mean that very sincerely, I'm not memeing. If we look at the late game in Festival of Legends, Pack the House is as big as it gets. If we go to March of the Lich King, we have several cards that have seen like literally no play and almost no experimentation. We go to Murder at Castle Nathria. Gigantotem is not actually an in-game card. I didn't know this card was in the game. If someone had played this against me, I would have been very confused. I legitimately didn't know this existed. And Criminal Lineup's cool, it's just a question of, again, what are you duplicating? Why are we doing this? And the answer's Ragnaros, by the way. Unfortunately, with Enza, Criminal Lineup plus Jive Insect comes out to be exactly 11 mana. You can run Riverfin Crocolisk, the new bot that increases your mana to 11 if you want to try to turn 1 minion into 3 rags. It's a pretty funny idea for a deck. I don't know about getting to turn 11 though. That sounds a little bit rough. And then we come to Voyage to the Sunken City, and we have this failed archetype of casting all of the different kinds of spells. And if it did cast this, it wouldn't be getting a whole lot of value in the first place, and Glug the Gulper is hardly an in-game control win condition. Like, there's just not a thing that Control Shaman's trying to do right now. And I can go through all the neutrals and be like, are we playing Denathrius? Is that the game plan? There's not great late game options for many of these decks that seem like they kind of want to play control games. But all the same, I'm definitely confident in the mid-range decks that Shaman is putting forward. I think Totem Shaman's definitely going to be the better of the two. This deck actually looks somewhat impressive. I think maybe there's a very different build of Overload Shaman that gets there. Presently, for me at least, I look at this and I see a functional deck in the same way that I look at Mech Mage and March of the Lich King. I'm like, yeah, that's a deck. You play minions on curve, you hit people, stuff happens. But I don't really see like a super concise win condition. I see a really janky curve with no 4-drops, and I see Doomhammer is how we're killing people. I'm like, wasn't Doomhammer just a kinda good way of killing people back when 1-mana Rockbiter was a thing, and that's gone now, and I guess I have it in the deck because there's not really other things. I'm running Command of Neptulon, what's that even do? I have to check that card. It's not quite there. It's so close to being good. And I do think Command of Neptulon, unironically, is a good card in this deck. 5 mana, summon 2 5/4s with Rush is actually just good if you're playing a deck that has any synergy with it. And this is a deck where our plan is stick something on the board, transform it into Rag, pack the house, beat them to death. So I do think like the deck has a cohesive plan. It doesn't have like a particularly strong finisher or a particularly smooth curve. It's got 1 1-drop and 2 2-drops, one of which, really both of which, would be better played on later turns. So I don't think Overload Shaman's there yet. I've got a lot more faith in the Totem list. And honestly, the Totem list is kind of awesome. I know I'm going to play this and it's just going to be fine. If it was only 3-5 cards away from being a good deck, it wouldn't be as off-the-wall bad as it is now, I feel like. But I'm optimistic. I really think Totem Shaman can be a lot better than it was just with 5 new cards. And I guess it's more than 5, because I'm running some other new cards. I'm running Tour Guide. You want totems? I got you a free totem. I'm really just interested in seeing any version of Shaman. I hope one of these 2 archetypes shakes out, gets refined, and becomes viable at some level. It's just sad that 2 classes haven't been playable for months. Anyway, that's it for now. I've been rather incoherent. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you enjoyed hearing me ramble about Totem Shaman and Overload Shaman and my hesitant enthusiasm for said things, then please do like, comment, and subscribe. All of that stuff really does help the channel grow. And I'll see you in the next one.